children aren't meant to linger in speech language therapy for years. Today, I'm going to give you a workflow that you can use for stepping through the different levels of support for a child or a teen with speech language or communication therapy, and then how we know when and how to dismiss them and or step down services. So we're going to give you this whole process that will walk you through really just this idea of how long should they be in therapy and what should we do when they get to the point where we don't need as much direct services? Do we just drop them? The answer is no. So we're going to talk through all of that today. So we're talking basically how do we fast track these children, these teens, these clients who are on our caseloads and maybe who are getting close to dismissal, but they're just kind of lingering. And the reason that we want to fast track these children, obviously it's going to help our workload if we don't have as many children that we are seeing, but that's not why we're doing this. We are doing this because of this idea of least restrictive environment. We don't want them missing more class time than they need to. And we don't want to be putting extra burden on families than we need to if it's a child who's outside of school getting services. And so what we really want for each and every client that we see is for them to learn from the educational opportunities that happen all day long. We want them to learn from their regular education classroom teacher. We want them to learn from their parents. We want them to be able to pick up skills as they come along instead of needing our help in speech language therapy to teach those skills, right? And so the reason they come to us is because we have identified that there is some skill that they're missing, some area that they are struggling in. And so our job is to provide them with the services, the teaching, the support that they need to get that skill and then get back to their regular life. We are not leaving children in speech language therapy for years and years and years. And just that's the norm, right? Yes, some children do sometimes need years of speech therapy, but it should be because they have evolving needs and then they have additional needs as they get older and they need new skills, and we're teaching those skills and we're progressing through that, okay? So here's how our current system, our current setup tends to work. And now this is not a universal. Obviously, there are some programs and organizations and schools who are doing this better or maybe just have a better process. But this is what tends to happen, especially in our school settings. So students either qualify or they don't, and there's nothing in between. And the way the system is set up right now, we have to wait until they are super far behind before we step in and say, yes, now you qualify. Come into my space and I will give you these services, right? And so it ends up being this all or nothing kind of thing, and then waiting until they're super far behind. And then once they qualify, they just keep getting the services. We, as speech language pathologists, we want to help. And so we continue to see these areas that they need help with, and we just keep going because they're not completely perfect at their speech language skills. So we think, well, maybe more services would help. And so eventually, at some point, their reeval comes up in the United States. That's every 3 years. And eventually on one of those reevals, we test them and they no longer qualify. And so they get dropped. And then there's no more services, no more support from the speech language pathologist. And they're back in the regular classroom, whether or not they were able to actually transfer those skills or not. And so that's what tends to happen. It's this all or nothing. And then the services just kind of get stuck in there and we linger. And we don't have a cohesive ecosystem that supports the child all day long throughout multiple environments, and moves them through the process so that they don't need to continue to receive those services when they are no longer needed, right? So what we want to do instead is we want to look at how do we set up a system that supports the child from day one all the way through and moves them through different tiers of support and moves them back into the classroom or back into their natural environment as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. So I actually made a handout for this, and it is inside the SLK Curriculum Hub. So if you already have a subscription, head over to the Hub. I just posted it this morning. So if you're listening to this shortly after the release date of February 2nd, 2026, then you can grab that. It should be right at the top of the page of your feed. If not, you can search for it or send me a message and I'll help you find it. But if you are not yet a member of our curriculum subscription, you can get that over at hub.speechandlanguagekids.com. But I made this handout, and if you can imagine in your brain, it has 5 boxes, okay? And so the first one is box number 1. This is our tier number 1, and it says natural learning. So this is the typical education that happens in the home and in the classroom. This is all children, all students getting just the regular education, right? And for most students, most children and teens, this is enough. Okay, we as SLPs, our role for this first level is just supporting the teachers, supporting the parents, answering questions, giving them the teaching tools they need to teach all of the children, all of the students. But some of our students will be struggling at that level, and they need something a little more. Now, these are not the students who are ready for speech therapy yet, because what we really want to be doing is giving them support before they get so far behind that they need speech therapy, right? So that's where we look at tier 2. And so if you are familiar with RTI, MTSS, a multi-tiered system of supports, this should all sound very familiar. This is tier 2 is where we add targeted strategies. And so this is still the teachers and the parents doing this with the child while they are with the child, right? Because they're the ones with the child all day, every day. But we as the SLPs can give them targeted strategies that they can use to directly support those students' learning and to maybe overcome some various challenges that they have. So at this point, teachers and parents are using more targeted strategies to support the learning for this specific individual in whatever way that looks like for them. And we are providing support to the parents and teachers by giving them those specific strategies. We may be working directly with that client a couple of times to just kind of figure out which strategies work, or, oh, hey, if we cue it like this, he's able to make that sound correctly. This might look like us going into the classroom and leading a small group with a group of children who are struggling. It might be us coming in and doing like a story time activity or doing a grammar lesson, and using some specific strategies and then modeling that for the teacher so that they can carry it over throughout the rest of the day. There's a lot of different ways that this can look. But basically we're saying, okay, before these students are really, really so far behind and struggling, let's arm our teachers and parents with some strategies that they can use that will help these specific struggling students. And what we find is that most students that get to this stage, that's enough for them, right? Now, I know that sounds like more work for the SLP if you are going into classrooms and doing this, but as you're going to see through this system, the actual direct therapy time, if you're doing this full system that I'm going to give you today, the direct therapy time is less because it's a temporary solution to teach new skills. And so you, as you are implementing this program, will then have more time to work on some of these tier 2 supports where you're providing strategies and providing support that will help these students not need to get all the way behind to speech language therapy. Okay, so bear with me here. The whole system works beautifully. It's going to take some time to implement, but we're going to talk about workflow here in a minute. Okay, so like I said, most kids benefit from tier 1, regular education, they got it. Some of those kids are going to be struggling, so they go up to tier 2. Keep in mind, they're still getting tier 1 the whole time, but they're also getting some targeted strategies on top of that. Now, there is a percentage of those kids who will still be struggling. And that's where we add our direct speech language therapy services. I'm going to call that tier 3 for the sake of this discussion. I know there's some disagreement on how the tiers are numbered. But that is where we say, okay, if they're still struggling after getting targeted strategies from the parents and teachers, then we can move to our direct speech language therapy services. This is where the SLP is working directly with the individual because we have identified that there are some missing skills that they need to learn. And we, as speech language pathologists, have the tools to teach them those skills because that's what our background and training is in. So our role then becomes directly teaching those specific skills to the individual that they're missing and learning which supports and strategies work for them to be successful. Parents and teachers are still providing that tier 1 and that tier 2 supports at this time, but we're adding this extra piece of saying, okay, we're also going to pull you out or come into your classroom if that's what it looks like and directly teach you these skills, okay? Once the child or the teen can demonstrate those skills in therapy, we remove that therapy. Okay. And this is the part where I think everybody kind of gets hung up and we linger, is we say, well, they're not generalizing it yet, so we still need to work on it in therapy. Or, they're close, but they're just not perfect. Our goal is not to get them to perfection before we dismiss. Our goal is to give them the direct teaching they need to learn the skills, to have a foundation, to know what strategies work. And then we want to push that right back into the natural environment. We want them to start generalizing that to the classroom, to home. And we, as the SLP, can't do that by ourselves because we are not with them all day, every day, like the teachers and parents are. And so if you were looking at my handout, we have 1, 2, and 3 that we just talked about. The next box goes back down to a number 2, but it's called generalization. So this is our tier 2 supports. Remember, that was targeted strategies, but now we're taking this from another angle and we're saying, hey, now our targeted strategies are generalizing these skills that I just taught them. Okay. So before we hit perfection, we are saying, now let's push it back into the classroom. And so now we want the parents and teachers to use these targeted strategies that we're giving them to help them learn to use their new skills, or to use their new skills to learn from the regular curriculum, right? So if we needed to teach discourse structures to a child, like narratives and how to state opinions and how to provide information, we taught that in therapy. And now we say, okay, here's how this would look in a small group to help them do that with their curriculum work, with their classwork, right? And so we're giving specific strategies to the teachers, to the parents, and the SLP's role becomes consult. We're consulting with the teachers and parents. We're teaching them how to support those new skills in the classroom and at home. And so we're not doing the direct services anymore, or if we are, we're doing a shorter version. So maybe just a 5-minute check-in with the student. A lot of times, once we get to that generalization phase, all they need is someone to just sit down with them 5 minutes, a couple times a week, maybe even once a day, and just say, hey, let's just practice your R. Remember that good R sound? Okay, now do that the rest of your day, right? And then the teachers and the parents are providing the reminders and the prompts to use that good R sound. We're just doing a quick touch-in just to make sure that they remember the skill. We're giving them the prompts and cues they need. Whatever that piece is, we can do that as a quick touch point, or we can go directly to consult. So there's different ways to do it. Again, remember when we talked about tier 2 the first time, we said maybe you could be going into the classroom and doing a small group with a struggling group of kids. So maybe these are your kids who are working on generalization, and you're just going in and helping generalize through whatever classwork is happening that day. And you're pulling in those tier 2 kids who haven't been in speech yet, that you're trying to prevent them from needing to go all the way through the speech therapy process. Okay, so this is where our time savings start to happen, where you're saying, I don't have time to go in the classroom right now. Well, if some of your children are going from 30 minutes twice a week in your therapy space down to a 20-minute group session inside the classroom where you're also including these RTI students who are in tier 2, now we're finding ways to support that are less time consuming for you and more effective, because number 1, they're being provided in the classroom where those students need those skills. And number 2, you can be modeling for the classroom teacher, for paras, for classroom assistants, any other adults who can learn the strategies that you're using and then continue to use those throughout the day. So it's not just the time that we have with them, they're getting it all day, every day, right? And that's where we get the generalization. And that's how we get them out of services, back into the regular education environment, not missing class time, able to learn from what's being presented in class, because we're all supporting the same skills in the same way. Okay, so that's the next box on my handout, generalization. And then the last box is called dismissal, and it's back down to a number 1. Dismissal looks like, okay, they no longer need tier 2 supports. They only need the regular education curriculum. The parents and teachers will continue to teach all day, every day throughout their daily educational opportunities. And the SLP goes back to just being available if the parents or teachers need additional support, or if new problems arise. And so this can be a fluid process where we're kind of moving through these phases, and we can come back to it if we need to and move back out of it. And I know paperwork is a thing that's involved with all of these different stages. But if once we start to get our systems in place and get our workflow in place, it becomes much easier to move through these because everybody understands the process. So I highly recommend you check out that handout because, like I said, this can be used you share this with the parents, with the teachers. Everybody gets on the same page and understands what that looks like. Now, with that handout, I also have a page that is a menu of supports because tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 are all going to look different for different children. And so what works for one might not work for another. For one student, you may be able to just provide strategies to the teacher because you know what's going to work. Another one, you may need to work more directly with them before you're able to provide strategies. So I do have a menu. And it says, here's the universal supports for all children. And the menu is the SLP role. So different things the SLP can offer at each of these levels and what that might look like. So if you're confused about what targeted supports or generalization phase might look like, or what kinds of direct services might look like, that's all in that handout as well. And then the third page of it is a "you are here" map. And so this is also super helpful when we're explaining this to parents and teachers, so we can explain, hey, this is where we are in the process. It's not all or nothing. It's here's what we're doing right now. Here's where we're going to go next. Here are some strategies to try. And so you have 4 options. There's natural learning, targeted strategies, speech language therapy, and generalization. And for each of those, you just check which phase you're in. And then there's a section to write strategies you're trying or skills you're teaching. And so that again, also just works to keep everybody on the same page. Okay, so that's the beautiful overall system. Wouldn't it be nice if we were all already doing that and had this in place? But we don't, right? We have a messy caseload that we have to start where we are and figure out how to start implementing this process. So what I recommend is you use these handouts at parent-teacher conferences, team meetings, IEP meetings, anytime that you're collaborating with others about a student, and start to explain this process so that teachers and parents start to hear it. They start to understand what our role is, what their role is. And you're going to have to bring this up more than once, right? Because parents, teachers, all of us, we're all overworked. We're all stressed out. It's going to need several repetitions before it starts to sink in, and for us as well, right? But this is going to help us explain that this is a team approach. And then if we're all on the same page, we can get that student caught up more quickly, and that makes everyone's lives easier, right? Including theirs. We want to explain that the speech language therapy part is meant to be a temporary support provided simply to teach the skills, and then we're working as a team to generalize, okay? We're not putting all the work on them. We're still a part of the process, but we are acknowledging that we are only with them for a very, very small percentage of their day or of their week. We want to support the people who are actually helping that child day in and day out, okay? So what I would recommend is if you have some students who you already acknowledge are ready for this, next phase, the generalization phase, who don't necessarily need to be in your speech therapy room as often as they are, then you could go ahead and start doing this either as their IEPs come up, or if you have extra time, then you can do an IEP early and you can say, hey, we'd like to move to the next phase of support for this student. Let's go ahead and meet, and you can start revising those IEPs. If you don't have time to do extras, just do it as their IEPs come up. But you're basically going to bring in these handouts. You're going to walk through this process. We have our screening checklists that are also really great for this, because you can say, hey, what problems are you seeing in the classroom? And it is a guided checklist that helps them identify what they're seeing, both in the classroom and at home. You can use them for either. And so those can be really helpful in this process to say, okay, here's what we're all seeing. Here's the overall structure of how speech therapy works. Where do you guys need support, and how can we move into this generalization phase? Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to remember what else I was going to make sure to include on that. So as you're doing this, as you're going through and you start to have these conversations, then talk about, okay, well, we're going into the generalization phase. And so for some students, you can go straight to consult, where you are simply on as indirect minutes on your IEP. You have no direct minutes, but you're consulting with the classroom teachers and with the parents to facilitate that carryover. For some children, it will make more sense for you to just have a shorter direct services time, like 5 minutes, and then add consultation minutes on as well, or indirect minutes. If you're, IEP based, that's one thing. It looks different in different places. So try to figure out how that looks in your system. But then the other thing you want to do during this generalization phase is make use of that modifications and accommodations section of the IEP, where you write down, hey, here are the strategies that this child needs to be successful. So those strategies that you found work really well in speech therapy, specifically write those in. I'm not talking about our general repeat directions, give preferential seating. I'm talking about writing specific strategies that work to support those skills in the classroom, so that they are documented, and that if that child were to move to a different classroom, a different school, they would know exactly how to support them. So you're dropping your minutes down or removing direct entirely. You're adding consult minutes, and then you're making heavy use of the modifications and accommodations section to specify the strategies that are working right now and that will help that student. And then you definitely have to follow up, right? Make sure you are checking in with parents and teachers to make sure those supports are working, and then add back those direct minutes as needed. I know a lot of times parents and teachers get worried when we start dropping down minutes or dropping off minutes entirely, that it's a hard drop, right? And we make this very clear. No, we can do a quick IEP revision meeting over the phone, add services back in if we need to, right? So just make sure that you're following up. Everyone feels supported. The student is continuing to make progress. And if not, you're helping troubleshoot. And then as you move more students to these tier 2 supports, that's going to free up some more of your time to be in those classrooms, providing that carryover support, providing small group instruction or modeling for the teachers, or troubleshooting for the teachers. If they're saying, well, we're still struggling with following multi-step directions, well, maybe you could come in and do an observation and say, oh, I see. She's getting distracted by this thing over here that you didn't realize was happening because you were putting out 3 fires over here. So it's this whole ecosystem that we're trying to support. The other thing that you can look at, there's a service delivery model called the 3-to-1 model, which is where you do 3 weeks of direct services and 1 week of indirect services every month. And that's another really good way to free up some of your time to be doing these indirect parts and going into the classroom and observing and providing supports in there. So that's another model. We could probably do a whole podcast episode on that, and maybe we will. But that's if you're looking for ways to make this work, that's another thing to look into. Okay. So we're going to stop there for today, but if you need any of these resources that we talked about today, we have the screening checklist that you can use to identify the areas of concern. We have the curriculum packets, which are, it's a packet for each goal that we cover, and it gives you all the materials you need to teach the specific skills that they need to overcome a specific challenge. So for example, asking and answering questions, there's 3 different goals you can choose from. Each one has a packet. Each packet also has data probes. So this is great to help you show progress over time, to show whether or not they can do the skill in therapy. Because if you have that data in front of you where you can say, look, we can do this skill in therapy. I know they're not doing it in the classroom, but I can show you the data that shows you that they do know how to do this skill. Now we just need to work on doing it in the classroom or at home, or doing it when there's distractions, or doing it when we're emotionally elevated, right? And so the data probes are great because they give you the data you need to be able to back yourself up while you're walking through this process. And then these handouts that I shared with you today on how to show parents and teachers the process, help everyone get on the same page, so that we can be supporting these kids in a way that actually makes a difference, as opposed to just lingering in therapy where we're doing activities, and yes, they're kind of helpful, but they're not really moving the needle. We never feel like they're getting closer to the finish line. This gives us a clear system where we have a framework from start to finish. All right. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. Of course, if you want the resources, go over to the curriculum, hub.speechandlanguagekids.com is the link there. And then, send me an email or shoot me a message inside the curriculum, and I'd be happy to help you with any of this that you need, because it's a lot. But if we can start to get these systems in place, it's going to make your job a lot easier, and it's going to make your therapy a lot more effective. Kids are going to make faster progress. It's a win, win, win. All right. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Speech and Language Kids podcast.